Chapter 225. That night, Roxanne and Larry attended the gathering, an event hosted by the organizing committee of the conference. It took place at a high-class restaurant known as Ocean Restaurant. The restaurant was situated near the hotel where the medical conference was held that same afternoon. The organizing committee had already booked a private room for the attendees in advance. As soon as Roxanne and Larry entered the restaurant, a waiter led them upstairs to a room in a corner. The private rooms in this restaurant had varying designs and styles. The organizing committee had probably figured that they were academics and scholars. As such, the committee members had booked a room with classical and scholarly decor. As soon as Roxanne and Larry stepped inside, a round table made of rosewood came into view. A flower vase was placed in the center of the table, which was surrounded by several rosewood chairs. The walls were also decorated with a number of paintings, making the entire room feel like a study. A few guests were already seated inside the room when Roxanne and Larry arrived. They turned their attention to the two and regarded them with awe and admiration. Both Roxanne and Larry were the youngest attendees of the conference. Although Roxanne was a young woman, the seniors were impressed by her presentation. At the conference, Roxanne smiled at the crowd humbly. "Sorry for the long wait. We aren't familiar with this area." After the conference, she had gone for a walk in Belridge with Larry without letting someone from the organizing committee accompany them. Unexpectedly, they had lost their way back to the hotel, and it had taken them a while to locate the building. "It's all right. Not everyone is here yet. Have a seat." Gerald, who was sitting in the head seat, stood up to wave at Roxanne and Larry, gesturing for them to sit next to him. His reaction caught Roxanne off guard. Gerald was an internationally renowned figure. Even Harvey had great respect for the man. Roxanne never expected to be held in high regard by Gerald. She stole a glance at the rest of the people around her and realized that their gazes were filled with envy. "We'll sit near the doorway. It won't be convenient for all of you when the waiters come over with the dishes later," she said. Then she sat down near the doorway with Larry. Gerald frowned, but he did not push it. "That's very thoughtful of you too." Roxanne smiled but said nothing. Sometime later, everybody arrived. "Miss Jarvis, you're such a young woman, yet you have outstanding credentials. You're a real talent." Everybody else began to heap praises on Roxanne after noticing Gerald's admiration for her and also witnessing her skills and talent themselves. Roxanne replied humbly, "They were only questions brought up by Mr. Lynch. Coincidentally, I have researched those subjects before, so I'm familiar with them." Gerald even proposed, "Do you plan to work for my company, Miss Jarvis? Just tell me what you want, and I'll comply." The crowd was stunned by this remark. Even Larry could not believe his ears. It was obvious that Gerald intended to take Roxanne on his mentee. Everybody else at the table knew it had been many years since Gerald last took on a mentee. Instead, he had been focusing on his own research wholeheartedly. The fact that he had made this proposal to Roxanne now came as a surprise to everyone. It took some time for Roxanne to regain her composure. She knew it was an honor when she saw the looks of encouragement on the faces around her. However, there was something else on her mind. "I appreciate your kind offer, Mr. Lynch. However, I'm currently helping Professor Lambert with some projects, and I fear I won't be able to focus on this mentorship. I have to decline your offer." Roxanne apologized and rejected Gerald's proposal. The rest of the people were shocked to see her reject this opportunity. Gerald felt somewhat disappointed. "In that case, I won't force you. Just approach me anytime if you change your mind." Roxanne returned an appreciative smile. "Thank you, Mr. Lynch." Chapter 226. Everyone at the dining table looked at Roxanne with more admiration They even had the urge to take her in as their disciple. However, recalling that she had rejected even Gerald's offer, they felt embarrassed to speak up. Gerald quickly changed the topic, but the conversation still stayed within the medical field because of Roxanne's performance. Earlier in the afternoon, whenever Gerald raised new questions in the conversation, everyone would immediately turn their gazes to her. Roxanne felt as though she had joined another conference, with everyone placing the main focus on her. Fortunately for her, such an atmosphere did not last long. Gerald soon realized the atmosphere had turned a little too solemn for the occasion, so he quickly navigated the conversation to something more relaxing. Being the juniors among everyone else, Roxanne and Larry became their main targets to tease. Whenever a senior offered her drinks, Roxanne couldn't find an excuse to reject them. She would accept every drink her seniors gave her. After having several drinks in a row and noticing how her seniors still intended to give her more, Roxanne quickly made an excuse to go to the washroom when she was only finding an opportunity to leave the private room to get some fresh air. The restaurant was named Ocean Restaurant, and its decoration mainly was in dark blue, with a touch of white, which gave the restaurant a mysterious yet calming atmosphere. After wandering around the door to the private room, Roxanne finally felt sober. She knew she couldn't make her seniors wait for too long, so she decided to head back inside the private room. Dr. Jarvis? Right after she turned around, she ran into a middle-aged man. His white shirt seemed a little too tight because of his beer belly, and the buttons on his shirt seemed as though they could pop at any moment. Also, the man's cheeks were flushed, indicating that he was drunk. Seeing that Roxanne had turned around to look at him, the middle-aged man took a couple of steps forward. He looked as if he was about to stick his face closer at Roxanne to confirm if he recognized her correctly. Roxanne frowned and stepped back, putting some distance between them before greeting. Dr. Chambers, it's been a while. The middle-aged man was a doctor working in the hospital that was a partner of Roxanne's research institute. Roxanne had only met him several times before this, and aside from his last name, Chambers, Roxanne knew nothing else about him. Seeing that he didn't mistake another person for her, he got bolder and looked at Roxanne in a perverted manner. I remember thinking you're beautiful when we met at the research institute, Dr. Jarvis. Now that I've seen you out of your research lab coat, I realize that not only you're beautiful, but you also have a great body. As he spoke, he slowly approached Roxanne. Look at your face. It's glowing. Let me touch it. Noticing that he had stretched out his greasy hand toward her, Roxanne felt disgusted and slapped his hand away. Dr. Chambers, you should know your boundaries. He was startled for a couple of seconds before realizing she had slapped his hand away. He frowned and glared. Either, how dare you hit me? Roxanne refused to dwell on this any longer with him, so she tried to make her way past him. However, he strode forward and blocked her path. Are you trying to walk away from me after hitting me? As I feel, let that happen. After saying that, he shifted his gaze lower to her slender waist, and the anger in his eyes dissipated a little. Spend the night with me and I'll forget what happened today. What do you say? Elf, you dare come any closer, Tome, I'll call security, Roxanne warned. Having been forced to a corner, he was unbothered as he tried to snake his arm around her waist. Greed and lust were written all over his face. Sure, call them, if you don't mind. We can always let them watch us have fun. His body was about to cover hers, and Roxanne knew she was at a disadvantage if she tried to resist him with physical strength. As she racked her brains to come up with an escape plan, the stench of alcohol slowly filled her nostrils. Just when Roxanne was slowly getting into despair, she heard a grunt. In the next second, he was sent flying away from her. Chapter 227. Damn it. What fuck is ruining my fun? The doctor covered his waist in pain and scrambled to his feet before he could take a good look at the person standing before him. He was kicked again in the abdomen. That person kicked him so hard that he instantly broke into a cold sweat. He bent over and couldn't say a word for a long moment. Roxanne stared at the man who exuded a cold and indifferent aura before her, and she was startled. But then, her heart was finally at ease at his presence. Control your hand, or I will ask someone else to chop it off for you if you don't appreciate it enough. The person who had come to Roxanne's rescue was none other than Lucian. He was in his expensive, customized suit, his hair combed to the back, revealing his sharp features. His thin lips were pursed, and his eyes were filled with a ruthless glint. Dr. Chambers finally came to his senses when he looked up again and noticed Lucian's expression. He understood Lucian was not making an empty threat, and his face immediately turned pale with fright. This is a misunderstanding. I know, Miss Jarvis, he quickly explained. I was wondering if Miss Jarvis wanted to have a drink with me, that's all. After saying that, he looked at Roxanne pleadingly. Roxanne remembered his perverted face from earlier, and her expression turned cold. I know him, but Dr. Chambers' actions earlier suggested that he wasn't only intending to buy me a drink. Seeing how Lucian's expression had turned gloomier after Roxanne said that, the doctor shuddered in fear. Meanwhile, noticing Lucian had not returned to the private room for a long time, Caden came out looking for him. That was when he saw the scene and quickly ran over to them. Mr. Farwell. Lucian withdrew his gaze from the doctor and ordered coldly, take this guy away. Also, run a background check on him and teach him a lesson. Glancing at the doctor next to him, Caden lowered his head and nodded in response. The doctor's legs gave way, and he was practically dragged away by Caden. Roxanne and Lucian were left alone in the corridor, staring at Lucian, who was still looking indifferent before her. Roxanne frowned slightly and got wary as she asked, "Why are you here?" She felt it was too much of a coincidence for him to be in the same place as her. Lucian did not answer her question but instead eyed her from head to toe. She was dressed in a formal suit with a collared shirt inside, making her look elegant yet, at the same time, mischievous. Her flared trousers highlighted her long legs, and her long hair stuck behind her ears gave more exposure to her fair neck. Under the light, she seemed to be glowing. Perhaps it was because she had had several drinks before. A layer of mist had formed in her eyes. Her staring at him calmly with a slight wariness in her gaze made her look like a terrified deer. Lucian's gaze darkened a little when he took in her expression. There was no telling if it was the influence of alcohol, but her attempt to keep a distance from him made her look a little enticing to him. After waiting a long while and still not getting a response from him, Roxanne pursed her lips and withdrew her gaze. Mr. Farwell, thank you for helping me. If there's nothing else, I will excuse myself now. My seniors are still waiting for me. She was about to walk past him after saying that. Just when she brushed past his shoulders, she heard Lucian saying, Miss Jarvis, I hope you don't misunderstand anything. I didn't have a choice but to come here to settle something at work, and I didn't expect to run into you here. Lucian gave her a sideways glance, and his tone sounded ambiguous as he continued. I think it was the same last time. Helped you out, but you didn't say or do anything in return. Instead, you treated me the same as those perverts, trying to put as much distance between us as possible. They stood very near each other, and it was unknown whose stench of alcohol was lingering between them. Roxanne recalled the first time she had seen him at the hotel after she returned to the country, and she frowned at the memory. Although she refused to acknowledge it, she knew Lucian was telling the truth. Chapter 228. Elle didn't ask for your help. After a long moment, Roxanne finally broke the silence, but her tone still sounded as distant as ever. Lucian frowned slightly at that, and displeasure filled the look in his eyes. Is that so? If I didn't help you just now, how did you plan to get yourself out of that situation? Roxanne lowered her gaze. LMA, doctor, I'll come up with a way. Eventually, having studied acupuncture for so many years, Roxanne knew which acupuncture points could make someone instantly lose the energy to attack, but not enough to kill them. If the doctor dared to get any closer to her, Roxanne would not hesitate to let him learn the brutal way about the gap between their medical knowledge. However, before she could make a move, Lucian had already appeared before them. Hearing that, Lucian immediately understood the implication behind her words. Back when Roxanne was performing acupuncture on Alfred, Lucian had watched her from one side, so he was aware of just how knowledgeable she was with human acupuncture points. It was certainly enough to show that Roxanne had the ability to defend herself. Thinking of this, Lucian could not help but feel more relieved. However, Lucian was still upset to see her indifferent expression toward him. In that case, can I assume you're seeing me as a busybody meddling in your affairs, Miss Jarvis? Roxanne fell silent and continued staring at him, despite her silence. Her expression was enough to tell him the answer to his question. The first time Lucian was seen as nosy for helping someone out of kindness. Regardless, I still helped you. Roxanne did not want to waste more time on this conversation. She frowned and said sarcastically, "Thank you, Mr. Farwell, for helping me. I should really get going, since you're here for business. I'm sure someone is waiting for you too. Shouldn't you return now?" With that, she nodded at him and was about to head back to her private room with her colleagues when he grabbed her wrist. Perhaps it was the alcohol, because Roxanne felt that all of her emotions were magnified at that moment. She was suddenly triggered by his action. "What on earth are you doing? I've thanked you. What else do you want from me?" she snapped. 6 years ago, when she was still madly in love with him, he had hurt her so much. Yet, now that she was determined to stay away from him and return to being strangers, he refused to leave her alone. Roxanne could not read through his mind, and she was no longer interested in guessing his intentions. She wanted nothing but to stay away from him as far as possible. However, Lucian refused to let that happen. At the same time, Lucian had no idea what he was doing. When he regained his senses again, he noticed he had already grabbed her slender wrist. Taking in her furious expression, he knitted his brows. "Is that how you treat a person who has helped you? Why are you in such a hurry to return to your private home? Is there someone you care about a lot waiting for you?" Roxanne found his accusation unreasonable. "What does that have to do with you? Let go of me." Despite her protest, Lucian exerted more strength into his grip instead. Roxanne was in pain, and her expression changed a little. Sure enough, Lucian captured every change in her expression, but he did not soften his grasp around her wrist, and he took a step forward. Roxanne narrowed her eyes and tensed up at his sudden advancement. Lucian chuckled meaningfully. He exuded a suppressive aura as he stared at Roxanne. "Miss Jarvis, even if you think of me as a busybody and refuse to thank me for helping you, I still risked losing out on a business opportunity by keeping my client waiting for me for such a long time." Inside the private room, "So, Miss Jarvis, is there any way you can think of to compensate me for my losses?" Roxanne frowned and met his gaze. She refused to believe there would be someone bold enough to refuse to seal a business deal with the Farwell family. This was only Lucian's excuse, and she was aware of that. However, since he had already voiced out about this, she refused to owe him anything.